and welcome to Upfront. I'm Kitty. Today we check in on the Korean government's three-year economic innovation plan unveiled early this year and discuss how the plan can bear fruit in riding out the economic downturn. And as always, we have a great panel of experts for this conversation. First up, to my left, Mr. James Frooney, Chairman and CEO of Market Force. Welcome to our studio.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks for joining us. And of course, Mr. Lee Sung-yong from the National Economic Advisory Council, a presidential advisory body, who is also the head of Bain & Company's Korea. Welcome to our program.
Nice to be here, Jerry.
Thanks for joining us. And of course, Mr. Ri Jung-soo, co-president of the Sustainable Development Global Network. So let's get started. But before we really kick things off, let's first take a look at what exactly this three-year economic innovation plan entails.
Korea has seen a slowdown in its manufacturing industry, which has been a main driving force behind the nation's economic growth. Major industries from semiconductors and mobile phones to shipbuilding and steel have lost vitality, and the nation has experienced a drop in domestic demand. Now is the time for the government to implement new measures.
우리 경제의 혁신과 재도약을 위한 경제혁신 3개년 계획을 세우고 이것을 성공적으로 이끌어서 국민 행복 시대를 열어가겠습니다.
The government has unveiled its three-year economic innovation plan, which looks at building economic growth for the next 30 years. The plan has been categorized into detailed tasks. There are 59 different tasks, including regulatory reform, boosting female employment, expanding exports through FTAs, and fostering the service sector, including medical tourism. Realization of per capita income of $40,000 US, 70% employment rate, and 4% potential growth rate. This is the so-called 474 vision, which President Park unveiled as part of her administration's three-year economic innovation plan. The International Monetary Fund and OECD have given Korea's economic strategy the highest marks among G20 member countries. According to the proposed plan, the domestic economy is expected to grow 4.4% for the next 5 years, for a jump of about $54 billion US. Other major policies entailed in the three-year economic innovation plan include the creative economy and regulatory reform, which were also detailed in the G20 Brisbane Action Plan. The Korean government's three-year economic innovation plan has been promoted to renovate the stagnant economy and to foster new growth engines for the future. Almost a year has passed since this economic plan was announced. Now is the time to discuss the results so far, as well as the remaining challenges.
So this plan, the title has the word innovation rather than growth or development. We're trying to talk about change the makeup of Korea's growth engine, the growth points. Do we really read into this word innovation?
Yes, if you look at this plan, which is in terms of objectives and what you're trying to do in terms of targets, it's very similar to the previous administration, Lee's administrations, of achieving, I think it's about 40,000 GDP per capita, high employment rate and so forth. But what's unique about this plan is that it has the word innovation and creativity, which is a term that we have not used before. It's almost a transformational, sense that you're basically jump-starting service economy, venture economies,
right,
which was very, very prevalent in the early 2000s. So it's to bring back those service-backed economy back into Korea. I think that's what's catching a lot of media's attention.
What else do you think is different about this three-year economic innovation plan?
I think one way to interpret it is to look at how Korea got to where it is today, which was really through what I call perspiration. It was hard work, it was manufacturing based, it was copying other people's technologies and catching up with the rest of the world. And about 10 years ago, we had clearly accomplished, great progress in that area. But in my view today, Korea needs to be in a different mode than perspiration. We need to be in the mode of inspiration. And innovation is a key part of that. It's being able to work smart. It's being able to develop the service sector, as Sunny has said. It's often about small businesses rather than large businesses, because large businesses have already established themselves. They're not as adaptable to change. That's not generally where innovation has come from around the world. So for me, Korea is making this paradigm shift from perspiration to inspiration.
And speaking of trying to achieve that paradigm shift, the main standout point for me of this plan is that the main player is the private sector. That's the goal here. And creating the environment on the part of the government with more deregulation and whatnot. So creating that environment and let the market do its thing. Is that the spirit of this plan?
Yes, it is, and that's what makes this plan very difficult and comprehensive. It is a different type of a configuration than developing country plan, where it's a much top-down process, where here is more of a coordination, not just from the private sector, but academics as well. So coordinating between the academic world, the private world, and the government sectors, you have to work in unison. And that's what makes this plan very challenging.
And we have a timeline, 3 years.
Yeah.
Does this, it shows the government's strong will to get things done before the administration ends. But is that possible? Is that feasible?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people, say maybe this coincides with the current administration terms and so on. But I mean, realistically speaking, it is very difficult to plan ahead beyond 3 years. So when we consult large corporations, these are Fortune 500 companies globally, you rarely go beyond 3 years because we just cannot predict the complexities and then just the uncertainties is just too much for us.
I asked you that question because there seem to be a lot of them. So, but it's receiving some positive reviews overseas, it looks like, at the latest G20 summit in Brisbane, Australia. Some of the key parts of this plan were sort of reflected, included in the Brisbane Action Plan. This can give the plan a little more momentum?
We've been getting a lot of publicity around this, which is positive news. Again, the challenge is implementation. And a lot of these plans have you don't have the D. You have a lot of I's, you have a lot of inputs, but decision makers often resides within the legislative body, not necessarily the executive body.
One of the significant the part of this is introduced as a model case to G20 meeting is that the evaluator body is the IMF and the OECD. And what they did is a feasibility study. This plan can be worked out as it is planned within the time frame. And the plan passed through that test. So that's what is significant. This is a doable plan.
When Korea presented this plan in G20, it actually gained a lot of applause because relative to other G20 countries, Korea's growing at 3% or more, right? Which every other country in the G20 would love to be growing at that rate. But I look at it the other way around. We're a country that used to grow at 8% per annum. Growing at 3% per annum is massively underperforming our potential. It doesn't matter what number we want to agree on with potential, but it's certainly bigger than 3% because Korea still has a long way to go globally and domestically to build out its economy and to become as advanced as all the other countries that you can name in the world that are considered, at the leading edge. So we have huge amount of potential, but we can get distracted by taking praise from foreigners, where actually we should use our own benchmarks and not foreign benchmarks. And I think the government cannot, as Sunny has said, cannot unilaterally act. One of the biggest challenges is building consensus and often overcoming political factors that are within the National Assembly who have reasons to resist that are not economically rational. But building that consensus, laying that foundation for future growth is really critical. And it has a lot to do with the educational system. It has a lot to do with how you train your young people, but it also has a lot to do with how you retrain your middle-level people halfway through their careers, and even people in their 50s and 60s can continue to be very productive if we'll give them new skills for the world of the future rather than the world that they grew up with maybe 40 years ago, where of course the training they received was very, very different.
One other comment I would have is that the reason this is difficult for a lot of OECD countries is that the word productivity is confusing at times. So when you say we are more productive, it sounds good, but the problem is it's not actually creating jobs. So what's happening is the GDP could go up, the productivity go up. What's happening is the efficiency is going up.
Right.
The plants are doing much better, much more leaner, much more efficient with the less people. So the productivity is going up, but job creation is going down. What's happening with this plan is you have to get people's job, more new jobs. That's due to the service. And
Right.
that's why you're having a tough time with the regulation. All service jobs are regulated right now. You need a license, you need to reporting procedures, you need to get the test passed, and to protect the existing professionals. So this is very, very difficult for us to move through.
And speaking of building that consensus, when President Park Geun-hye first unveiled this plan, she said it will help open an era of national happiness. And then how does the Korean public feel about this plan? Do they agree with this vision? Our team went out to the streets to get the public pulse regarding the government's economic policy.
We had a chance to go out and ask the public which part of the economy they think needs a boost.
It's difficult to pay tuition fees working at minimum wage. I can barely cover living expenses. I hope the minimum wage system is improved.
The government should stop useless talk and promote more accurate measures after gaining a better understanding of the financial difficulties people face.
I have a lot of debt as I am self-employed, so what worries me the most is the interest on my loans.
Job creation is one area the public has shown a high interest in, and it is also the area that the government's 3-year economic innovation plan has focused on.
경제혁신 3개년 계획을 제대로 실천한다면 청년들은 교육, 의료, 금융, 관광, 콘텐츠 등 선호하는 서비스 분야에서 일할 기회가 늘어날 것입니다.
9 detailed policies, including developing national skill standards, a reduction of working hours for parents, and encouraging flexible working hours, have been promoted. Almost a year has passed since the announcement of the Economic Innovation Plan, but a lot of people are still unfamiliar with the government policies.
경제혁신 3개년 계획이라고 있는데 혹시 들어보신 적 있어요?
잘 모르겠는데요.
구체적인 거는 잘 모르겠는데요.
We asked the public about promoting flexible working hours, which lets workers decide their own working hours.
A 30 to 40% reduction in income would not be desirable. But if the income drops only 5 to 10% and I can make use of my free time, I guess I might want a job with flexible working hours.
More and more office workers are open these days, so I think jobs with flexible working hours could be a solution.
Flexible working hours are not a welcome measure from an employer's point of view. I think it's better to let employers decide working hours and make them pay better wages.
Women and the younger generation, who are the main targets of flexible working hour jobs, are unfamiliar with the system. And while companies are generally aware of the system, they haven't shown a strong will to actually implement it. 1 year has passed since the government announced the 3-year economic innovation plan, and it is time for the government to actively promote and accelerate the implementation of the strategy.
So some of those interviewed suggested that they didn't even know about them, these plans. Is this a PR issue, or is it because we haven't seen much progress so far?
It's a combination of both. Traditionally, economic plan like this in the past has been basically, like I said, top-down. These days, you just don't get the airtime with the top-down approach.
True.
You need to get much more SNS medium involved, mass media involved. So it's got to be much more, not only the push matter, but also pull from the public. The other one is it's hard to describe, what this plan is in one sentence. It's got everything
impossible.
in it. So if you ask me, what's this 3-year entails, and I'll say, well, a lot. But can you just name few? Then I would go through the list, and you just suddenly lose the interest.
True.
So I think that's one of the challenges. How do you coin this term so people remember easily?
Also, one of, I guess, distinctive difference from the previous administration's development plan is previous administrations really focused on big, humongous, eye-catching project.
Right, green growth.
But this plan is, again, very comprehensive and also departmentalized, and many details need to carry out. So it's really hard to say that this is this.
Okay. We faced exactly the same challenge back in 1998. With a colleague, I came up with a plan how to stimulate employment. And we had to find a way to communicate it very directly. So we called it the 1 Million Jobs Program. And we got Hanguk Kyungjae Shinmun, Career Economic Daily, to work with us on this. And they ran a campaign. And in the latter part of 1998, they started having pages and pages of their newspaper devoted to this OMJ program, as they called it. And then KBS picked it up in early 1999. And again, they invited ordinary people in from the street into the studio, spent lots of time each afternoon discussing how to create new jobs, what were the issues, what were the barriers. And I know that there are people in today's Blue House who were involved in that program, who saw it, who tasted it. And I hope they can remember some of the mechanisms that were used, because you're not going to change Korea's direction from a perspiration society to an inspiration society if you don't mobilize 50 million people to start thinking in a different way. And then learn from them at the granular level, what are the barriers, what are the issues they run into, what are the problems? Because Korean people are very creative, but if you don't listen to them well enough at the street level, you're not going to find out how you can help them.
One of the challenges that we face right now is that, versus 98, is that we don't have a crisis right now. Once you have the crisis, you are in the survival mode, and you are much more reactive to that. We have somewhat recession, but it's a prolonged recession. Right. So people are immune to that. So you say change, but people don't change. You have to change harder. You have to say harder, more, louder, and so on. But it just immune system takes over. And I think that's what's happening here, is that people understand they need to change. Government understand they need to be more forceful, but it's very difficult to do. I get a good example with the tourism. To build a resort in Korea, it takes over, it requires over 300 signatures or stamps among different agencies. Right. And how do you fix that? So the plan is not just say, well, fix it. Every agency has to go through what they have to do to reduce this number of signatures. Right. So even one agency reduced 5 signatures, you still have to go through 295 of them. Oh. So every agency has to be involved. That's why this plan has to be very comprehensive and be in sync with each other. I think that's the challenge we're facing right now.
Then are we not happy with the quality or the speed or the scope of the progress so far?
Well, the plan is in effect only 6 months now, so jury's still out, right? But I think next year will be a critical year, because you're reaching that first year. If you miss the targets, milestones in 1 year, first year, it's almost impossible to catch up. So I think it's critical that that we do well first year. Now, that said, there's some positive signs. If you look at number of venture startups, last 6 months, or even before that, it's gone up. It's gone up much more so than previous 3 years. So there's some positive signs. But you know, if you look for the success case story, we just have not seen yet, but it will come.
We've shifted from depending upon the US and the EU to depending upon a growth engine called China that's been growing during that same period at more than 8% per annum. The little ballerina of Korea should be dancing on the back of that elephant that's called China. And I think one of the great positives of the last few weeks has been the announcement of this FTA with China.
Right.
And exploiting that is part of laying that foundation for future growth. And we shouldn't just think of it in manufacturing terms, and we shouldn't just think of it in terms of what it will do for a chaebol. We should think of it in terms of how does it help our small and medium enterprises? How does it help our service sector? And as Sunny said, we have a lot of barriers to being able to put new facilities in place, whether they're for recreational tourism or medical tourism or sports tourism or educational tourism. And we have all the conditions that anybody would wish for with this great big elephant next door who's not going to go away anytime soon and who represents Korea's single biggest opportunity for driving its own home growth.
And James, you just did my job. We're going to walk through this plan item by item. Not all of them because we would be totally out of the time, but we have a graph, so if we can take a look at that really quickly. As you mentioned, innovation of public institutions, of FTAs, deregulations, SMEs, and job creation for young generation. These are some of the highlights. So I want to ask you, what stands out to you the most, or what part of this plan would you like to see most progress with?
Well, I think the strengthening the foundation of growth is really important. One of the items is the pension reform, and clearly that each year there are about $3.8 billion in deficits from the subsidizing the government, the civil employee, and also career military pension.
For me, I mean, every one of those items are important, but I don't think it can perform by itself, right? So I think it is very coordinated.
Sure.
One item that sticks out is the deregulation. The regulation is a very, very critical. The other one that's coming up is a little bit tricky, is a shared economy right now. Is the you know, Airbnbs and Uber and so on. This is a huge, huge economic plus for Europe and in the US. And part of that is that basically people retire. There are a lot of empty nesters, and they have extra room in their houses, and this helps people to you know, at a much lower cost, and you have to leverage or utilize their unused assets, basically. Things like that, if you could just deregulate a little bit, I think there's a lot of potential opportunities for SMEs and individuals.
So Jerry, if I only had two choices, okay, one of them would be the one I've mentioned already, the China FTA. Combined with the FTA with Europe and the USA, you're opening your markets to a very, very large proportion of world GDP. Probably just between those three regions, China, EU, and US, or North America, you've captured something like 60, 70, maybe more % of world economy. So that means we've got market opportunity. My second greater passion, which is much more important to me, would be education. My more immediate focus would be on providing retraining for 30-year-olds, for 40-year-olds, for 50-year-olds, and for 60-year-olds. Think about some of those people, what the world was like when they grew up. GDP per capita in Korea was probably less than $1,000 per capita for somebody in their 50s or 60s today. And yet they are incredibly valuable resources in this workforce. They're going to live longer, they can be more productive longer, and you know, the pension programs that have been built for those people will last longer if those people can remain in the workforce longer. And those pension programs are actually a kind of fuel to redeploy back into the economy.
Mr. Lee, which sector then do you think would be difficult to see through?
I think the service is also you have much more opportunities, but also I think you have a much more resistance from existing you know, stakeholders, basically stakeholders. And again, this is not economically, logically driven argument. It's more politically driven argument.
Right.
And that's tough. That's tough, right? So, I mean, I had a joke the other day where, you know, in early 1900s, when there's a horse and carriage, and certainly automobile comes along, should we subsidize carriage and horse driver for automobile coming in? If like, should we subsidize them?
Good
right?
analogy there.
And you subsidize for first month, and more automobile coming. So should we subsidize more? And how long should we subsidize it? I think the similar logic, not as drastic as this case, but that's how it's happening, right? I mean, this shared economy is happening, and you know, what are we going to do about it?
All right, so we've been talking about merits and demerits, strengths and weaknesses of this three-year economic innovation plan. So almost 1 year has passed now since the announcement of this plan. So let's take a look at how much progress we've seen so far.
An exhibition to promote a dynamic and innovative economy, which is one of the three main goals of the government's three-year economic innovation plan, was held in Seoul last week. It was meant to accelerate the creative economy drive, one of the detailed tasks laid out in the economic plan.
I want to start my own business and got a lot of information at the exhibition about lots of different kinds of businesses, as well as a youth academy for startups.
It's more helpful than looking for information on the internet or in books, since I can hear the personal stories of people who have started their own businesses.
The creative economy has emerged as the government's key economic strategy since President Park took office in 2013. Through the creative economy drive, the government has focused on fostering new industries and vitalizing the competitiveness of small and medium-sized businesses through better ideas and advanced technologies. As part of efforts to galvanize the creative economy drive, the government established the Centers for Creative Economy and Innovation in March. A total of 17 centers are planned to be established through the first half of next year. The government recently legalized the remodeling of trucks to be used as food trucks. It is part of regulatory reform, which is one of the most significant tasks when it comes to finding a balance between domestic demand and exports, which is also another goal of the government's economic innovation plan. The domestic market in Korea has gone through a recession, unlike the export market, which plays a critical role in Korea's economy. Regulatory reform has been suggested as a solution to tackle this. From cases that are closely related to people's livelihoods, including legalizing food trucks, to the ones that are related to the construction industry and small businesses, the number of regulations has decreased and it is expected to continue. The last goal of the government's three-year economic innovation plan is building an economy with a solid foundation. One of the most urgent challenges to be tackled is reform of the public sector, which includes eradicating corruption in bids for public businesses, managing the debt of public institutes, and rooting out unfair trade. One of the tasks that has raised a lot of controversies is the reform of the public pension system, which the government has stressed as an urgent priority.
공무원 연금 개혁이 매우 시급합니다.
In March, the government established a new regulation to launch a special committee for reforming the pension system for public officials. But the ruling and the opposition parties have been at odds over passing the bill. Detailed tasks have been promoted under the government's three-year economic innovation plan. But some of them still remain in the stage of discussion, which challenges the government to find a balance between the tasks at hand.
And let's zoom in on one of them. And I would like to continue the deregulation part of this conversation with you. So what would be some of the examples of excessive regulations here in Korea?
So this is unique to Korea. And if you try to understand why is it unique, people really cannot answer. But it's always been that way, so therefore it is. For example, motorcycles, we cannot ride in a highway. Why is that? I don't know. That's what it is. It's always been like that.
That's dangerous. No?
but then why is it the other countries allow them? If it's the same logic, does it create more accident? Inconclusive? So I mean, there are things that are unique. So if you just go through the list after list, there are just a lot of those things. It requires time, but if you kind of unleash that a little bit, it just becomes an economic, profitable.
So the idea of deregulation here in Korea, it's to spur domestic demand here in Korea because we depend too much on exports. Is that one of the rationales?
Yes, we are about 70% export-driven economy. Right. I think the challenge we have is that realistically, if you look at the last 10 years, the domestic economy has not gone up. So if you take the export portion out of our growth GDP, it's actually declining. And I think that's what is alarming about this country is that, we can continue to rely on exports. And the problem with the export is right now, two risk factors we have is the Chinese economy, and the interest rate for U.S. Those two factors that we cannot control, and yet has a detrimental impact in this economy. And one of the things that this plan is trying to do have a sustainable economy, which have some domestic consumption and a growth engine. And I think that's a challenge that we're facing right now, is that how do we grow domestically as well as through the export.
I'm not sure until we can see significant income growth for Korean people and more people in the workforce that we'll actually have any very fundamental growth in domestic consumption truly defined. So my solution for that is actually not to worry about it too much and focus instead on bringing consumption into Korea through the visitors that come here. Finding ways that visitors will want to come to Korea. When they come, they will want to spend money. They will want to enjoy themselves with food and entertainment and shopping and all other kinds of things. And we have fantastic entertainment, but actually it's in short supply. Theaters, musicals, all kinds of things, which we're very, very good at. So there's plenty of ways to boost up, in an economic sense, domestic consumption. But I think use not the Korean population. Use that much, much larger population that's right next door to us.
One thing I want to add is a very interesting fact is that depends on how you count, because the statistic right after the Korean War is a bit mixed. We go through about 15 recessions in Korean history, ever since the Korean War. And 13 out of 15, you know what bails us out? Construction industry. It's the real estate market. So you look at how the Korea survived all these years, it's basically real estate market. And that's why it is a very, very tied to the construction industry. And that's why domestic consumption is a key. And that's not happening last 10 years. Another interesting fact is if you look at top 10 companies in Korea, even top 20 companies, we haven't had new companies start up in that scale. There are a couple, but went bankrupt, unfortunately. But they're just not having new companies in the last 10 years. And that's very alarming for economists and consultants like
Well,
me.
and let's talk about big companies for a minute, because there's an illusion in Korea that they are the backbone of the economy. But first of all, let's remember that they employ only a tiny fraction of the entire workforce, probably not more than 1 million people out of more than 20 million people in the workforce. They contribute maybe at most 10% of GDP if you calculate it properly. And a lot of people calculate it completely wrongly.
Different standards, I guess.
And yet they have captured more than 50% of the resources in terms of assets and in terms of liabilities, debts. But if I look at those big companies today, their mission isn't really to expand more in Korea. They need to globalize. They need to build their plants in other people's countries. They need to get closer to the markets. They need to tap into lower cost sources of labor in the middle of Eastern Europe or South America or wherever. That will be good for Korea in the long run, but it doesn't build further domestic manufacturing base, which we shouldn't expect to be the driver. On the other hand, if we can find ways to support the talent of Korean companies to make interesting things that are competitive in the world market, and one of the ways to do that, by the way, is to remove artificial protections. If you had protected the horse and buggy trade you would never have built an automobile industry, okay? And we protect some of our old, we protect many little niches in our market. We resisted people like Apple coming in. We resist other foreign technologies, but actually we shouldn't, because they are a stimulus to us to do better.
That's certainly an interesting takeaway in terms of talking about potential paradigm shift here in Korea. Now, there was a forum recently here in Seoul talking about industrial innovation and how to breathe life into Korea's service sector that we've been talking about. And we tracked down one of the participants there and connecting to him right now for his insights. Werner Horst, Deputy Director of Labor Policy at the Institute for the Study of Labor, is joining us. Thank you so much for coming onto our show today. And my first question is, it looks like Korea's industrial structure took center stage this time and was also criticized to some degree at the recent conference that you were at. I believe the heavy dependence on the manufacturing sector was talked about the most. What ideas did you share at the conference? Do you think we need to reduce this dependence?
Actually, I was present at a very interesting conference in Seoul earlier this month. And the basic issue is something I think that is being shared by many developed economies, that is finding ways how to make our economies more innovative, smarter, and more diversified. So I think Korea is certainly aware of this issue, and it shares some features also with Germany, where I come from. It's a relatively strong dependence on manufacturing, on exports of goods. So in the long run, I think there's certainly some potential to make this manufacturing sector more service heavy and also to produce more, let's say, goods in a more sophisticated way, so that they are now also more heavily integrated with the service sector. Altogether, I think that Korea is pretty much aware of this, and also some of the policies that were discussed at the conference certainly point in the right direction.
And staying with the service sector, my research shows that Germany is a good case in point with high labor productivity in the service sector versus the manufacturing sector. Do you think Korea can take a lesson from this case and apply it to its own system?
Yeah, to some extent, this is certainly an option. Of course, also the German service sector is somehow polarized. We have high value-added services on the one hand, and we also have more low-pay, low-productivity services on the other hand. So this is certainly less of an attractive segment of the labor market, but it seems to be somehow inevitable in the 21st century. But what is most important is to create services at a very sophisticated level around manufacturing cores. And I think Korea is in a good position to add service content to its very strong and very competitive manufacturing core.
I see. All right. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there for now, Mr. Horst. Thank you so much for your insights and time today. And we just talked about the service industry, part of the three-year economic innovation plan. Then now, let's focus on the job creation part of the story. We're connecting to Professor Patrick Sjöström from Gothenburg University in Sweden. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. So there are a variety of service industries, IT, healthcare, finance, you name it. Which field stands out to you the most as a sector that can potentially bring big economic effect down the road, and why?
I think that there are several sectors that have the potential to actually bring economic growth and employment growth for many, both advanced countries and emerging markets. It all depends a little bit on the industrial structure of the respective country. And I think particularly when it comes to the Korean case, there is a very good example from the growth of the computer online game industry, where we actually seen a tremendous growth in this cultural and creative sector, which is becoming an important part of the service economy for many industrialized nations. Another sector which I think is important to have in mind is, of course, health and life science sectors, both through its connection to other sectors and IT, but also because many of the advanced economies today share the common problem of a demographic problem for the future, with declining birth rates, and in some cases also, some countries have also already entered the phase of declining population. And of course, when the population then grows older, you would need more and more investments into the healthcare and life science sector. So I think these are sectors that could really be important for the advanced economies, both in East Asia, in Europe, and North America.
Then how significant is the service sector when it comes to employment, job creation?
Yes, that's a very important question, and I think that many people don't realize how large service functions or employment really is in the economies today. So if we look at most of the OECD countries, the most advanced countries in the world economy, we'll see that most of them have an employment share of roughly 65% and upwards when it comes to service employment. Many countries have 3/4 of their total employment actually being found within the service economy. So the transformation of economies becoming more dependent on services is rapidly shifting, and the growth path that we've seen in OECD that took many, say, several decades to get a very large position of the service economy is today much more rapid in emerging markets like China, for example. The same situation is there when it comes to the generation of the GDP that we have in most advanced economies, 3/4 of the economy being generated from the service industry. This can be public services and it can be private services. So it's important to bear in mind that this is a kind of an aggregate of different service industries.
All right, Professor, we have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for your insights. Great to have you with us. So back here in the studio, let's talk about the implementation, execution part of the plan. But what concerns me, though, the innovation plan controlled by the economic ministerial meeting presided over by the finance minister, regulations by this committee presided over by the president. So we also have private players and public players coming in, when it comes to a service sector innovation. Are we going to get things done this way?
So this is a major problem. First, the issue is that how do you coordinate all this? And you don't have a legal body to coordinate. So the way our government is set up is basically set up either in sectors and functionalities. So the plan requires a multi-task force unit with some timeline. The other one that I've noticed more in Korea is that for some reason it does require more legislative involvement than other countries. So for execution parts to do it, but here it requires, I don't know if that's driven by government employees' excuse or ways to delay the changes or what, but it has a little bit more legislative content than the other countries for some reason or another. So I think that's a major challenge we're facing right now, just the coordination, it just takes too much time.
Well, it certainly is a major challenge, and the way they are looking at the what's happening in dynamics in the Blue House and also the ministry level, it seems that the President's office has a special team to monitoring the progress of a different task force. And I don't know that is the answer though, but the energy level as well as the detail level is much more than what it used to be.
One of the things that we're actually experimenting, and it's been somewhat successful, is that when we consult to large companies, we face similar issues. So you have a great strategy, great policies and procedures, but yet don't get executed because the employees don't believe it. They say in front of the CEO, but when they turn back and go back to their work, they go business as usual. So how do you mobilize these people? How do you make them as if they're their own plan. So we develop a co-creation workshops and what we call the results delivery technique. This is where we get together with an employee and be a more a facilitation role and actually how do you move the plan to execution. It requires much more buying in, not just communicating, but actually have them come up with the strategy to how to implement this forward. Similarly so, and I think similar techniques can be used in Korea. So it was different. The difference is the government no longer plays the control tower. It becomes a coordinating, so it will be, let's say there are 10 people in the committee, and government is one of them. And it's just one, and the 9 are from the communities. So whether they're experts or the opposite parties, legislative parties, or representing different stakeholders. And they're the one comes up with the strategy as to, what would mitigate all this risk? What will make this plan successful? How would we implement this effectively?
In line with that idea, as you mentioned earlier on in the program, that it is likely to face some hurdles, some resistance, opposition from some of the stakeholders in some of the sectors, namely the service sector, as you mentioned. How do you advise the Korean government to approach them, create that dialogue and communicate the need for this?
I think first of all, you need to create much more awareness than what has been done so far. What's it for me? I think you need to create that sense of benefit statement much tighter. The other one is I think you need to deploy the current media from the traditional ones. So leverage SNS, leverage mass media, have the talk show programs like this, have the Korean dramas around that, have the some games around that.
Let me say that we should look to government for wisdom and leadership, but abstract ideas at the human level don't really help. And I'd like to come back to that human level. This is about people. And I don't think it's quite, as Sunny put it a minute ago, what's in it for me. That might be true in America, but I think in Korea, it's what's in it for us. And it's particularly if you think about what is the single most precious thing to a Korean person, it's their children. It's their next generation.
The future.
It's their brothers and sisters as well. So what's in it for their children? What's in it for their friends? What's in it for their grandma, right, or their parents? What are the ways that this can be humanized? And I'm sure that every day there are success stories out there, but you never hear about them. If those success stories, how children get more opportunity through their education, how young people get interesting jobs, how 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds find ways to rebuild their lives after the first 20 years or whatever. These things should be identified, they should be celebrated, they should be shared, because that will build a national consensus and a passion.
Now let me get your final thoughts, and I want to start off with Mr. Ryu this time.
Well, the economic innovation plan is very well designed, and just the government would like to really promote the success story. What's the process of this, how they can implement, and what is the end result to people of Korea?
Okay, and Mr. Lee?
So I think this plan is a good one. This plan is a good one. But if you had more severe crisis, I think we could have gotten a lot more visibility of this plan. As we head into 2015, the external economic factors is not as positive as it would like to be. I think that's going to create more pressure on this plan. And one thing I would like to ask the viewer is that you need to embrace this plan as if it's your own. Or else if you wait for the government to create a job, it just won't happen. Government does not create jobs, private sectors do.
Okay, and
Sunny and I both spend our days building businesses. He for his clients, me on my own account, and we run into the challenges of implementation every day. The first thing is to have a good plan. That's pretty hard work, and we get highly trained in how to develop good plans, but they're nothing without good execution and good leadership.
Thank you so much for coming in today, all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, our viewers, for watching, and I hope you can join us again next time.